everyone, my name is Charlene, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 books from 2024. So I actually read a lot of really good books this year, so narrowing this down to a top 10 was not easy. But there are 3 honorable mentions I'm going to talk about before we start, because these are my top 10 fiction books for the year. But I do also have some nonfiction that I really enjoyed this year, but I don't really read enough nonfiction consistently throughout the year to warrant either a top 10 of nonfiction or including a whole bunch of them and knocking out some of my fiction books. So I'm going to mention those really quickly. The first one was I Am Hutterite by Mary Ann Kirkby. And if you're not familiar with Hutterite, think of it kind of along the lines of the Amish community. Not quite to the same extent. They don't have the exact same beliefs. They don't have the exact same lifestyle. But there are similarities between the two groups. So she was raised in a Hutterite colony. And at some point when she was growing up, her parents left. And this is her kind of looking back on her time being raised as a Hutterite, why her parents left, what effect that had on her and her siblings, how they tried to adjust to living in the English world, as they call it, and kind of her views on the Hutterite culture in general. I really enjoyed this book. It was the first nonfiction I read this year, and it was an easy 5 stars. Then the next one is The Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson, and this is a look at how the English language has changed, how it got started, some of the, idiosyncrasies of the English language, some of the things when it comes to spelling or grammar or pronunciations and different things like that. I'm one of those weird people who very much enjoys learning about other languages and learning more about my own language. So I really enjoyed this book. And Bill Bryson does have a sense of humor that is woven throughout the book. So it also makes it a lot easier to read because it doesn't feel like just a dry textbook read. And the last one I forgot to pull off my shelves, but that is The Mona Lisa Vanishes by Nicholas Day. This is actually a middle grade nonfiction, and it's about a time, I don't remember the year now, but early 1900s, when the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre. It was said it couldn't be done, that nothing could be stolen from the Louvre, but somebody went in and they stole it. And so this book covers the investigation, trying to find out who stole the Mona Lisa, trying to get it back. It also covers the lives of Leonardo da Vinci and also the woman who was the model for the Mona Lisa. I don't remember her name now off the top of my head. Sorry. And kind of just the anybody and everybody who could be involved in this. So it does jump all over the place as far as who are we talking about, what time period are we in, and all of that. But there is a lot of really good information in here, and Nicholas Day clearly did a ton of research for this book. Alright, so now we're going to get into my top 10 fiction books for 2024. And for the most part with these, I'm going to just cover them in the order that I read them because honestly, I was struggling trying to put them in any kind of order. So, that's just how we're going to cover it. However, the first book is the one that's going to be out of order because it's the only one that's on this list that I did not actually give 5 stars. It either got a 4 or 4.5, but there is a reason it's on this list, even though it did not get 5 stars. And that is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Now, the reason why this book didn't get 5 stars is because there are parts of the story that, even as much as I was enjoying it, I found to be kind of slow and kind of hard to get through. Not as many parts as a lot of other people have issues with, but there were still some parts where it was kind of slow, it was kind of dragging or meandering, and I didn't enjoy it quite as much. But the reason why it's on this list, even though it didn't get 5 stars, is because this is the book that has stuck with me the most throughout the year. I finished reading this book in, I want to say May or June. I don't remember what month I read it in now, but it is one that still periodically, throughout the rest of the year, will come to mind and I will find myself thinking about it. So regardless of the fact that it wasn't a 5-star read for me, it still had an impact on me. So it is the first book on this list. And I'm sure most of you know what this book is about, but in case you don't, this is a book in which we follow the perspective of a man named Ishmael. And he is a sailor. He goes on whaling journeys every so often, mostly because he's bored and decides he needs something to do. And so he meets a man named Queequeg, and Queequeg is signing up to go on a whaling trip on a ship called the Pequod, captained by a man named Ahab. And so Ishmael decides, sure, why not? I'll go with you. But after they leave the port, Captain Ahab announces that he wants to hunt the white whale known as Moby Dick. Moby Dick took his leg. He wants to take the whale's life. And so while they are whaling, like they're supposed to be for their job, they're also keeping an eye out for Moby Dick. Every time they come across another ship, they ask them, have you seen the white whale? And it's made known, and the crew ends up agreeing to it, except for one, that if they see the whale, they are going to pursue it. That is the gist of what this book is about. Yes, there are a lot of chapters that talk about a lot of things to do with whaling, a lot of things to do with being at sea. And to be honest, it does kind of make sense, because if you think about when this book was written, the average person probably didn't know much about whaling or being at sea. And so it makes sense that he would include that information for people who want to read the book, but would be very confused to read about all the things happening on the ship and wondering why is it happening. So I think that's the reason he explains a lot of it in here. There are other random chapters, like one where he talks about the color white, which honestly was one of my favorite chapters. Go figure. I ended up really enjoying this story, and it's the ending of the story that has stuck with me for so long. But I did also actually really enjoy my time reading it. All right, now from this point on, I will be talking about the books just in the order that I read them throughout the year. So the next book is The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte by Siri James. I still say I don't know if this is a case of I read the right book at the right time, or it really is just that good of a book. So to kind of explain the format of the book, the main thing you need to understand is, one, the diaries in this book are fictional. However, Siri James states in the introduction that she finds it hard to believe that Charlotte Bronte, being a writer, would not have kept a diary at some point. And so her thought is that she probably did, but if she did, more than likely it was hidden away after she died and just never discovered. Like, hidden by the people who knew her and knew she would want her private thoughts kept private, and was just never discovered. Or it could have been burnt, for all we know. But she writes this book as though these are diary entries that Charlotte Bronte wrote. Now, I will let you know that most of this book is told in flashback, as if the events that she's writing about have already happened. And Charlotte is looking back on the last few years of her life and is writing in her diaries all the things that have happened. And then at some point, the diaries catch up with where she actually is in her life. So it goes into a lot of detail about what her growing up was like, what different jobs she had, what type of schooling she had, about her and her sisters writing and getting published, and just all of the different things that they did. And as best as she could, she tried to write the diaries in the style of the way Charlotte Bronte wrote. So I had been doing a lot of reading about the Brontes towards the end of 2023, and then picked this one up in January of 2024. And I just ended up really enjoying this book. Every time I picked it up, I didn't want to put it down. So this is definitely one of my top books of the year. All right. The next book is in a very different vein, because it is not a classic. It is not based on an actual person. It's not historical whatsoever. That is Lunar New Year Love Story by Jean Luen Yang. And also, this is a graphic novel. So it's not even a novel. But in this book, we follow Valentina, who is obsessed with Valentine's Day. It's her favorite holiday. And she also has, it's a bit of magical realism. She has, to her dad, it's an imaginary friend, but to her, she can actually see him, and it's Saint Valentine. and he kind of helps her with writing her Valentines every year and all of these different things. But at the beginning of this book, she's a junior in high school, so 11th grade for those of you outside the US. And it's very much to the point where nobody else cares about Valentine's Day except for you. And so she's kind of writing off the holiday a bit, or feeling down about the holiday. She also ends up learning that year that apparently her family is cursed to be unlucky in love. They may fall in love, but things don't work out, or they think they've fallen in love with someone, but that person doesn't actually love them, whatever the case may be. And so she's afraid of getting hurt. She's afraid of falling into this family curse the way her mother did and the way other women in her mom's family did. So Saint Valentine ends up offering to take her heart. And basically, he will hold her heart and it will protect her from being hurt. However, it also means that she would be numb to all emotions. And she's not sure she's okay with that. So she ends up striking a deal. She will have a year in which to find love. And if she doesn't, then she will give him her heart. And the book follows her throughout the course of that year as she tries to find love, as she gets involved in a lion dance group and all sorts of different things. This book does cover a lot of different Asian cultures. Valentina, I believe, is from a Vietnamese family. She meets boys that are from Chinese families, Korean families. So we have a lot of different Asian cultures playing a role in this book as well. And yes, she is in high school. So before you get concerned of she's in high school and she's going to find true love, just read the book. I enjoyed how the book ended and I was skeptical for the same reason. So just read the book. But also, I really enjoy the illustrations in here, especially the lion dancing, if I can find a picture. So that's not necessarily one of the better ones, but it at least gives you an idea. This one just came out in February of this year, and I bought a copy because I want to reread it next year around Lunar New Year / Valentine's Day, because that's at least where the story starts and stops. All right, so the rest of the books on this list are novels, just regular novels. That's the only graphic novel on the list. But the next one is The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie. And this is the first book in the Tommy and Tuppence series. So Tommy and Tuppence are two people who are friends. They've known each other a long time, but they're kind of down on their luck. They're needing money. They're needing work. And so they put an advertisement out in the paper basically saying, if you have a job for us, we're willing to do it. Kind of the we're willing to do anything. The things that they start getting called about, they end up concerned about, okay, there's something clearly going on here. What's going on? And what it all boils down to is back in I want to say 1912, but I know that's when the Titanic sank. I can't remember what year. Somewhere in the 19-teens, there was someone on the Lusitania who had papers on him that he needed to deliver to the British government. And I think it was some kind of treaty or something like that. But, as we all know, the Lusitania sank. And obviously women and children were the first ones to get off the ship. And so he gave the papers to a woman on the ship. And she was able to get in a lifeboat and make it to the UK. I think she landed in Ireland, but then was supposed to go to the UK. However, at some point along the way, she and the documents disappeared. And so the treaty was never seen, it was never signed, and ultimately things worked out the way they were going to work out. The world went on without these documents. However, now there are people saying that they have the documents and they're willing to reveal them, but these are now documents that the government doesn't want revealed because of the terms and conditions they had in them. So they're trying to figure out, does someone have the documents? Who has them? And they're hoping to get a hold of it before the person reveals them. So Tommy and Tuppence get caught up in all of this stuff. And the biggest thing I will say for this book is, of all the Agatha Christie stories I have read, this is the most fast-paced, action-packed book I have read by her. And it was so much fun. So I haven't read any more Tommy and Tuppence, but I am really looking forward to getting to more of their stories. Then the next book on my list is Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik, which is the second book in the Temeraire series. This is a historical fantasy book that takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, except there are dragons. Honestly, the way these books are written, it reads more like a classic novel, or maybe more like a classic fantasy, than a regular historical fiction. Think a little bit of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and you're probably getting close. So, I really enjoyed the first 3 books in this series. However, I read books 2 and 3 this year, and this one by far was my favorite. I did still really like book 3, but I liked it just a little bit less than this one, so this is the one that's going on the list. This one follows up kind of where we left off with book 1, except in this one, Lawrence and Temeraire the Dragon are traveling to another country. I'm not going to say which country, but they are traveling. A lot of this book is travel. However, even that being the case, I still really enjoyed the book. A lot of this story is about the friendship between Lawrence and Temeraire. It's about kind of the treatment or view of dragons, how some countries treat dragons one way and view them a certain way, and other countries treat them very differently, for good or ill. And so Temeraire is constantly learning new things, and because of that, he's constantly asking questions. Why are things this way? Why are things this way? And Lawrence is finding himself either having to justify or try to justify why things are a certain way, or potentially concede to the idea that you're right, maybe another way would be better. But also understanding that he as one person and Temeraire as one dragon would struggle to change the views and opinions of the people in the UK. Especially the government. I really enjoyed this book. This is probably my favorite in the series so far. All right, the next book is the only one that I do not own, and that is The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sarah Brunsvold. This is a Christian contemporary book, and we're following 2 characters. Mrs. Kipp, who at the beginning of the book is entering an assisted living facility. She has cancer of some kind, I don't remember what, and so she's basically going to be living there for the rest of her life, however long that may be. And it's discovered by one of the nurses that she was involved in some things in the past that the nurse is very interested in and thinks a lot of other people would be interested in. And so a newspaper is contacted, and one of the reporters, I can't remember her name now, she's newer, hasn't had a big break, anything like that, but she's assigned the job of writing Mrs. Kipp's obituary. Or at least that's what she's told. Her job is to go meet with Mrs. Kipp once a day, get her story from her, and the hope is basically that in the end, she will uncover Mrs. Kipp's actual story and put that story in the paper. Not necessarily that she's going to get an obituary, but she doesn't know that. This is just a really good story because Mrs. Kipp has so much really good life advice, so much good insight, and she has a really interesting story. So I ended up really enjoying this book. All right, the next one is The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This was another new release this year, and I loved The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. So when I heard that this one was coming out and it had more of a sci-fi twist to it, I was really excited to get to this one. Honestly, I think it's the sci-fi twist that made me enjoy this book so much, but it's, I feel like, also possibly the reason why so many people didn't like this one as much as Evelyn Hardcastle. So this book takes place in the future. At some point in our world, this fog broke out, and anyone it comes in contact with ends up dying. And a group of scientists were able to put up some kind of barrier around this island, and that barrier keeps the fog out. So this is the only place in the entire world that humanity can live. And the book takes place further into the future as this society of people have grown. More people are now on this island. But this is a society where violence really doesn't happen. Everybody works together. Everybody gets along together. They're looking out for the best of the entire community. But one day, one of the scientists shows up dead. There's one character in this book who is not really like everyone else. She doesn't just conform to what everybody tells her to do, she asks questions. And so she ends up getting tasked with trying to solve this murder and figure out who killed this woman. And there are a lot of twists and turns in this book, a lot of different reveals, a lot of different interesting things really explored in this book. And I ended up enjoying this so much. Honestly, because I really enjoy sci-fi, I think I actually might have enjoyed this one more than Evelyn Hardcastle, which really puts me in the minority. But I thought this was a really good book. I thought it was really well done. All right, the next book is one that you guys voted for one of my one and done videos. And yep, you guys did well because it's in my top 10. And that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Now, I have enjoyed all of the books that I read for my one and done challenge, but this is by far my favorite and definitely one of my favorite books of the year. Where to even start with this book? This book is following primarily the life of a man named Adam Trask. I almost have to use that follows loosely. It's not always from his perspective. At the beginning of the book, we're following his life kind of as he's growing up, seeing how his father treats him, seeing how his relationship with his brother, all sorts of different things. And then at some point, after he's grown up, his family lives on the East Coast, but he decides to move to California. He's married. He and his wife moved to California. He eventually has 2 twin boys, and there's a man he meets named Samuel Hamilton. And the story mostly follows their 2 families. That is the simplest way to put this book. There are so many interpersonal dynamics in this book. Just the relationships between different people. And more than anything else, this feels like a book that focuses on Adam Trask's relationships to everyone else, their effect on him and his effect on them. But I ended up really enjoying this book. I will say, as far as content in this book, content warnings for everything. If you can think of it, there's a really good chance it's in this book. But the story itself is really well told. And I ended up just really loving the story as a whole. All right, the last 2 books you would have heard me talk about recently if you saw my fall wrap-up part 2 video. If not, it'll be linked down in the description below if you want a little bit more information. But the next book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And this one, it was hard to know what I was getting into with this book. I've heard it referred to as a gothic romance. I've also heard it referred to as a revenge story. And I would say both are accurate as long as you understand with gothic romance, it's heavy on the gothic, not on the romance. This is not a love story. There are characters who are in love with each other. We're seeing different romantic relationships, but it is not a love story. Just know that before you pick it up. There is a revenge plotline in here, and that is like the fueling part for most of the story. And I will let you read the book and decide if you think any, some, or all of the revenge is justified or not. So a lot of different viewpoints on this story, so I will let you decide that for yourself. So much going on, a lot of different family dynamics, and friendship dynamics and all sorts of stuff. And yes, pretty much every character in this book is unlikable. I won't say every character. There are a couple characters I do like, but almost every character is unlikable. This was just a book that I was very enthralled with and could not put down. All right, and the last book is the most recent book I have finished as of the time of filming, and that is The Women by Kristen Hanna. But it's a good book. It is a very hard-hitting book. This one, if you're somehow not familiar, because I feel like everybody's been talking about it this year, but this book is about a woman named Frances, goes by Frankie, who ends up serving as a nurse in Vietnam. And in about the first half of the book, we see her time in Vietnam, what she saw, what she dealt with. And then in the second half of the book, we see what her life is like after she comes home from the war. It's not an easy transition getting adjusted to Vietnam. It's not an easy transition coming home. So her life is kind of all over the place, to be honest. But she was also dealing with a lot in both places. I'm familiar with the Vietnam War, the fact that it was very brutal, very bloody, just honestly, it was an awful war. Very dangerous. One of the bloodiest wars we've probably ever been involved in, if not the bloodiest. And the people who came home from the war were not the same after serving over there. And that goes for the women as well. But unfortunately, a lot of them got brushed aside because either people thought women weren't in Vietnam at all, or they just focused on the fact that women weren't in combat. Even though they were constantly seeing the result of all of these combats and dealing with that. And it still had an effect on them, but it kind of got brushed aside for everyone who saw combat. Not denouncing the people who saw combat, because that was brutal too. But this book is mostly just looking at the women's side and saying they suffered too. It doesn't take away from what the men suffered, but understand that they suffered too. Overall, really enjoyed this story. There's a lot in here, but the story itself is really good. So those are my top 10 books for 2024. Let me know down in the comments below what some of your favorite books of the year were. And also, if you've read any of the books that I talked about, you can let me know what you thought about them as well. Because I know some of these books can be fairly divisive, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Other than that, I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season, and I'll see you later.